Right on my spot. Acts chapter 18. Now there's an old legend that one day Satan had a garage sale. He was selling all of his tools that he had used over the centuries. He had lying, hatred, murder, malice, greed, envy, jealousy, pride, all these different things. And over in the corner there was one tool that was priced more than all the other tools put together. It was so priceless that nobody bought it. Why? Because it was discouragement. That is Satan's most important tool. Amen? You can relate to that. And so Satan may not get you to go deeply in sin, or he may, but he can get you discouraged. And a discouraged believer, my friends, is an ineffective Christian. That means that we've taken our eyes off the Lord and we put them on our circumstances in life and we've walked around discouraged. And since Satan never sold that, he's still using it today. Amen? And whenever you give up, you need to know that the devil wins. And one of the fundamental principles of the Christian life is don't give up. And if we're all, one thing is so true, we're all subject to being discouraged. There's no shortage of discouragement to hinder the work of God. As we've been studying the book of Acts, we're seeing now Paul moving on in his missionary journeys. We'll look at some of the discouragement that he faced, some of those that we can also face as we serve God. The Bible's full of men who at times felt discouraged. And you and I get discouraged from time to time. I know I do. Anybody else? Yeah, we do, right? So if you will, let's think of, there are a couple of things that probably made Paul discouraged. First is the large strain of the work that he was called to do. I mean, Paul comes to, here we go now, we're moving to the largest and the most wicked city in Greece. Sitting high above the city of Corinth was the temple of Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And they say there was over 1,000 temple prostitutes associated with the temple that entered the city each evening to apply their trade. One worshipped the goddess of love, and the good churchers, and these were good churchgoers, by the way, worshipped the goddess of love by having sexual relations with one of these prostitutes. That's how they went to church. They went and had sex. If you're a woman, you'd have sex with a woman prostitute. That helped. And if you're a man, you'd have it with a woman. Or the man, I guess, could. I don't know if they had male temple prostitutes, but they definitely had women. And it was so evil and so dark. There was no city in the Roman Empire that was more corrupt. And when confronted with the depravity of this city, I think Paul, they say he was writing from Corinth when he wrote Romans. And I can understand Paul maybe thinking of the description of what he saw in Corinth when he says, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Men committed shameful acts with other men. Furthermore, they did just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God. So God gave them over to a depraved mind, in verse 20, so that they do what they ought not to do. I mean, Satan has that way of doing it, you know. He's powerful. He can make us think of strange ways to live life, strange ways to get involved in sins of various things. And God would say, you know, I've had enough. Come on, you're supposed to be my people. You know, if that's what you want, go ahead. Go ahead. And he gives them over. I think Paul was thinking about, he probably wrote that. He could have wrote that right as he's looking out at the landscape of Corinth. What would God say as he looks out at the landscape of the United States of America today? You know? Every depraved thing that you can imagine was happening in Corinth. And here he is overwhelmed with that immorality of Corinth. He's very much alone. He left all of his co-workers. At this time, Silas and Timothy were behind. He's in Corinth. He's facing the challenge of presenting the gospel to an entire city of about 250,000 people. Totally overwhelmed, probably. So the strain of the work is one of the things that probably could cause him to get discouraged. Another thing that can cause us and you to get discouraged is the little success of that work. Now, God required us to be faithful, and the success is up to God, and we know that. But while Paul had some success, he had been basically ran out of every place he's been. Right? We've been studying his work in all these cities. They were trying to kill him. They were still following him around. And while he had seen some come to the Lord, the masses of the people rejected the truth, and that can be discouraging. The third way can be discouraging is the lonely service of the work. He's got to do a lot of work alone, with just one or two at his side. You would think that they would get more involved and more would be excited and more would reprioritize their lives. But alas, the time came when you travel God's path. It is a lonely path and a discouraging path if you follow God. Amen? But I am so grateful that while the devil's active in discouraging you and I, God is at work to encourage us. Amen? While the devil is trying to drag us down, God is working to lift us up. While the devil aims at getting us to quit, God is working for us to continue to keep up that good fight of faith. Amen? So I want to share with you this morning in this text 3 encouragements to keep on going. 3 reasons we should keep on going. 3 reasons why Paul was able to do it. Okay? First is in verse 1 through 5. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife, Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them. And because he was a tent maker, as they were, he stayed and worked with them. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. When Timothy and Silas came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. So what you have happening here is Paul's alone for a little bit. He meets new friends, Priscilla and Aquila, who gather around him and encourage him. Soon after, Silas and Timothy will come. Friends, the first thing I want you to know, to be encouraged, is we need the partnership of friends. Amen? Can you relate to that in your life? And Silas and Timothy were in Macedonia. Paul needed help, so he sends that beautiful couple to help him. God gave him the money for the sport he would need because he was a tent maker. And Aquila and Priscilla became his closest friends. And then the other 2 came. God has blessed him with 2 new friends and 2 familiar friends. You know, Paul was pressed in his spirit to testify to the Jews in the synagogue that Jesus was the Christ. And I just want us to remember, it's a whole lot easier to stand under pressure of opposition if there are those, even just a few, who are around, who will support you, strengthen you, and stand with you. Amen? Thank God for friends He puts in your path, in my path, and in your life who will encourage you, especially in the work of the Lord. Amen? I'm so grateful for friends that God has given me. And I'm grateful because you don't know how many times I've been even discouraged in serving God and to have even our group, we've stayed together these last few years, encourage each other, building each other up in the faith. And as I've said often, it's great that we have a place to come together and be encouraged in this dark world. Amen? But that's only part of it, though. The other part of it is we are called, as we go out of here encouraged and fired up and inspired, that we will reach others for Christ. Amen? And hey, last week I left school. I left here. I was just fired up, loving the Lord. And my first couple of days teaching at Atlanta Christian School, I was so fired up for God. When you come by my classroom, my room is like a big sound. It's like a big media center, and there's always praise music going on for Jesus and kids acting wild for the Lord. I started my history class with a praise song, you know, and I just there's such a hop in my step because of friends and of fellowship together. Amen. And maybe you and even just doing the gifts that God has called me to do. Those things have had a lot to do with the joy, you know? And so you think about that in your life. Friends will help you along. I heard it said, a good friend will come bail you out of jail, but a true friend will be sitting next to you saying, we screwed up, dude. I really believe that. I have some friends that are like that, you know, a few of you here. And I think that's really cool. I read of 2 friends in World War I who were inseparable. They had enlisted together, they had trained together, they were shipped overseas together, they fought side by side in the trenches. And during an attack, one of the men was critically wounded in a field filled with barbed wire obstacles. He was unable to crawl back to the foxhole. The entire area was under enemy crossfire, and it was suicidal to try to reach him. Yet his friend decided to do just that, to go. The sergeant told him, it's too late, you can't do him any good, you'll get yourself killed. But the man went anyway. He returned a few minutes later, carrying his friend, but he himself had been mortally wounded. The sergeant was both angry, his friend was mortally shot. The sergeant was angry and yet deeply moved. He blotted out, what a waste! He's dead and now you're dying. It just wasn't worth it. And with almost his last breath, the dying friend who went after him said, oh yes, it was worth it. Sarge, when I got to him, the only thing he said to me was, I knew you'd come, Jim. You know, we need to understand the power of encouragement and staying with each other. Amen? And loving each other. Standing up for your friends. Standing up for the Lord. And being there for those even when they fall. So here is Paul. Encouraged by friends. Amen? And then we'll see here verses, like the second part of verse 5 to 8, the positive results. We see that Paul was exclusively preaching. He was able to preach and testify to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. There in Corinth, verse 6, when the Jews opposed Paul, became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, your blood be on your own hands. I'm clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go on to the Gentiles. So Paul left the synagogue, went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the ruler of that synagogue he had gotten thrown out of, and his entire household believed in the Lord.